somebody fell asleep actually sitting.
Your topic is keeping them interested.
Right here, and they're like, "Yep, I'm awake, I'm asleep." To a certain degree, that's going to happen no matter what. I just realized.
Yeah, I would think statistically a certain percentage
are just going to be asleep the whole time, anyways, and I think that's okay. The goal, though, would be to have more awake than asleep. And the ones that are awake actually paying attention. So how do we do that? And this doesn't work for me. We have to like circle chairs and do something crazy because I can't stand around like people in the back of the room not participating.
And you fell asleep in a circle.
Right. I will fall asleep in this thing if we're not doing it.
Technical informing.
These do not work at all inside.
Trying to work
Unless you have a fusion reactor.
Trust me, not capable of being in my social circle. We should just sit together as a pocket of badness. Actually, let me take that one. And pull two out from that room. Okay, you know what the left-hand one? No. I saw it. I saw it when he has the glasses. Yeah, I know. Martha's going to replace Emily as my new best staff, you can understand.
Are you going to go out and talk to
I mean, you can see a sunspot right now.
Well, let's go check.
I don't even know what to think about this microphone here.
And see what the sun looks like.
I'll hide behind the microphone.
I got to be in the SDO mock yesterday, Mission Operations Center yesterday. Absolutely awesome.
I'm sure someone will come in and tell us whether the computer can see things. Who cares?
Because it backs people's heads.
Exactly. You know what? If people were really engaged, they would be here. I'm not bitter.
But you are here.
I am
I think
here.
you're the
See,
only
that's
one
the
blocking.
biggest thing. And you guys are here, which is exciting. Wow. So, engaging the next generation of explorers. I think we have some cool people here. Does everybody know who is actually involved in education outreach programs right now? All right. Go around and say what kind of education outreach stuff you do already, just so we kind of have an idea of where we're at.
Can we start on that side of the room?
Yeah.
Sure, okay. So I work in the Office of Communication and Education at JPL, and that's where our visualization group lives, and it is our group is about trying to make the very best interactive 3D visualizations we can of missions, of data, whatever it takes to explain what we're doing. I only moved out here about 14 weeks ago. When I was back in the UK, I was not in the space industry, but doing a lot of lectures at astronomy societies and schools. I'm going to try and start doing that over here, but it's taken a while. You go.
Oh, I just do my own little personal yay space. I'm a writer, but not to the public. It's more for the engineering community. But the public does have access to it. So anyhow, you guys, that was not very descriptive at all.
It was not.
Sorry.
Who do you write for?
A division within the Office of the Chief Engineer is called the Academy Program Project and Engineering Leadership. So it's the other Apple. Yeah. So mostly we tell stories about projects as they're being built, missions as they're being built. So how do we get, what went wrong with Hubble, what happened with Kobe, how do we get that off the ground after the shuttle, after Challenger? So I think I mentioned in one of the talks earlier that missions need to have stories behind them to make them more interesting. So I'm part of that, but a lot of the writing that I end up doing ends up being technical. So anyhow, we'll keep going around.
I'm going to write down just things that I hear. Okay. No, it's not.
Totally crashing.
But you're obviously the people that you're a representative of the group that we're trying to reach. So you're the next generation of explorers. So we'll come back to you. Unless you do you do outreach? Do you do stuff where you teach science to the kids?
He tries to, no one wants to listen. And that's the hardest problem that he's coming into, is that no one shares the same passion that he does. So I work at Northrop Grumman Corporation. I'm actually in business management and finance, so I have no idea about any of this, so I depend a lot on Emory and whatever he posts outside his door. And that's where I get all of my outreach to bring home to him, because I don't share that same passion. So I have to find it wherever I can to help him.
Gotcha. Ladies in the back, do you do education and outreach work?
A little.
Not yet.
Oh,
She will.
She does
We were
the
just talking about
Smithsonian.
that.
okay.
I do. I volunteer at the Smithsonian, the Air and Space Museum at the observatory once a week. So, but yeah, I was just talking to Aaliyah about maybe doing
You
some
do
more.
the solar telescope, right?
Yeah.
We ought to partner and have like SDO at the solar telescope.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
over.
That would be fantastic. Well, you guys already have a great exhibit inside the museum, but to bring it out would be perfect.
We can do that, right, Martha?
Yes.
Right answer.
So I'm assuming that, do you all work with SDO? Is that the?
I don't, no. I work with the astrophysics division at Goddard, so I do primarily informal education as opposed to classroom education. I do help create after-school programs, Girl Scout programs, to help kids learn about the universe outside the solar system.
And my job sounds a lot like hers. I'm the deputy lead of our EPO group at the astrophysics division at Goddard, and my focus is actually outreach. So I do our new media efforts, I do our podcasting and our blogging, and then I do completely public outreach projects. So planet walks, we do family science nights, we do stuff like that, and we do partner with the SDO people. We like them sometimes.
Not all the time.
Okay.
I am the public outreach lead for SDO. So my big projects are the big SDO projects, so Exploration Station, Astrozone, making science cool, making people feel like science isn't something that they can't do. So those are our big projects.
Okay. Mike?
I do this unconference.
How's that going for you?
Ask me again tomorrow. I'm not really sure. I
Is it
know.
tomorrow yet?
Kind of a blur. I think it's going all
For
right.
some people it is, yeah. This side of the room?
I actually don't. I consume the wonderful outreach that you guys all do.
I do go out and talk to student groups independently. My wife is a kindergarten aide, and I've talked to her collective kindergarten classes. So, sit and talk about space to 65 6-year-olds sitting on the road. And they just eat it up, yeah, it's just one-to-one. One-on-one and, like you said, one to a lot. I've been talking to Google and X Prize people about, doing some more outreach kind of stuff with them. They're getting that spun up to have multiple people go out and talk on their behalf. So it's a great, that's a great venue because they have something that's really exciting. It's kind of been underground to date. It hasn't been extremely public, but when you start talking about, people are actually going to start talking about launching things, it's going to get interesting.
It's going to get
So,
really interesting.
It's going to get really interesting, and I think it's going to be a great outlet to talk to people that, hey, guess what? There's a robot going to the moon. They're going to go, what? So it's a great topic, the icebreaker.
All right.
Yeah, I'm mostly just a consumer of this outreach, apart from occasionally badgering my friends and coworkers.
I host stargazing programs at one of the parks in Montgomery County.
Oh, fantastic.
Astronomy Day, star parties, that sort of thing.
Very cool.
We're hoping NASA will eventually get to the point where they can do something about the weather.
You should have 2 good weeks here, so.
Problem we have is that we have to schedule these programs. The minimum is 3 months in advance, as much as 6 months in advance, and that's a serious problem.
Just say if there's anyone who would like NASA to control the weather, it's NASA themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
The tweet up was a good example of that.
Exactly.
Like, we wouldn't.
Snowpocalypse.
We didn't want that snow.
Or was it Snowmageddon? Well, you know.
Yeah, since I escaped DC in the middle of Snowpocalypses 2 and 3.
I'm going to move my seat because I feel weird behind me.
Oh. Okay.
I
Just move over here like this, look, and then you would be fine.
It's fine. It's okay here. I do education public outreach for SDO. I do everything teacher related.
That works. Okay. Cassie?
Well, as you all saw, I write music that does outreach, and I'm hoping to develop more songs that specifically reach to children, and possibly bring that into schools. Just like we used to have silly music programs, I'd like them to be ones with actual meaning, you know. But right now I do a lot, I play out and I market my music to non-space geeks. And after almost every show, people come up to me and ask me questions about the songs I've been playing. So I try to go into much further detail. Actually, I had one show where people started chanting NASA, 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 after I played Big Sail for NASA.
That's really cool.
And it was not a bunch of space geeks. I was the only space geek in the room.
And I'm going to take a giant leap and say that it's because you have a good story that backs up.
I try to personalize. That's what I try to make it like personal, make people realize this affects you personally. It's not just a big government program. It actually affects you. It's not just that you're putting money into it. You're getting something out of it. A lot of people don't realize that NASA does things that affect them at all. They don't realize all the spin-offs, for example. And, that they're getting something for their money. Whereas a lot of government programs are just spending and spending and spending, and you don't see any return. NASA's actually, there's a lot of returns.
Okay. Wow, it's kind of cool that we're weighted heavier on the people that are doing this stuff, which is good. But I'm glad to have Noah, and some consumers in here as well. I think the consumer market is what we really want to focus on. What are the frustrations? I mean, as a parent, trying to find some of this stuff, do you ever encounter something that's really hard to convey? Do you have problems finding things? Is there a communications channel that we're missing? Because I think a lot of what you just said is true. People inside feel like, geez, nobody knows this stuff. It's hard for us to get these messages out. Or we do get them out and they get skewed, or nobody wants to hear them. There's like all this conversation about it's hard to do outreach for the space program or for science in general. And why is that? Why do we have that perception? What's driving that forward? Is it that we don't have the right message? Is it that we don't have the right story? Are we ineffective in just what we're doing or what we're trying to sell? I mean, people can sell water to an ocean. I don't think that it's that there's no market for it. So what's the issue? Yeah.
I mean, it's the most ridiculously stupid invention ever.
And then they have competition
inside
that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if you can have a blanket with sleeves and then someone competing with the blanket with sleeves. Seriously? Yeah. There's online animals that...
Come on now. My blanket sometimes slides and slips and slides. And I just have a real problem with that.
Use your hands.
But if people can sell blankets and Snuggies, what's the deal that we can't sell the most amazing thing that we know about, or that we deal with ever, which is awesome? Why can't we get people interested in this stuff?
Preconceptions. I mean, you've never seen a blanket with sleeves till you see that horrible commercial, and apparently people look at that and go, "Oh, a blanket with sleeves, I could wear that." People don't look at a lot of the stuff that we're putting out there and go, "Oh, I could do that. I could like that." And I think there's already this preconception that science is for scientists. Science, there's a whole culture in our culture about you don't need to take science classes. They're hard. Parents turning their children off to science. I'm glad to see parents involved. It excites me to see people who are empowering their kids because families have that huge impact. But it's a negative one, and we're raised in a culture that's kind of science-phobic. And I think that's a huge piece of it, where people are already tuned out and turned off because of just what you're selling and the stigma attached to it and the preconceptions attached to it.
So who's doing the selling initially? I mean, because a cultural conversation like science is hard, or people who do science are stupid geeks,
that comes
that kind of stuff.
From your peers. That comes from your peer group. It comes from your parents. It comes from your upbringing, your
teachers. Because teachers, kids always ask in math and science classes, why do I need to study this? I'm going to go into the humanities. Why do I need to know this? And the fact is, we use science and math every single day of our lives.
Yeah.
And that should be the answer. It should be, you are going to use this. You don't know the ways you're going to use this, especially now with technology and everybody using it. How many people actually understand how any of it works?
Mm-hmm.
Or even if you work in accounting and you use Excel. you know, that's actually, you use some pretty advanced math in that, and people don't look at it that way. They don't make the connection between that and, you know, taking an advanced math class, or, you know, taking a chemistry class to know more about how to bake a cake.
Well, application sells. I mean, that is a big piece of that. That if you can tell someone why they're learning something and why they should. I mean, university STEM majors have a huge dropout rate, and universities that have taken approaches to tackle teaching their students, and the first classes should be about why, and the later classes should be about what, and usually you start out with the what and later do the application, and they've found by flipping that they actually will have a drop-in rate instead of a drop-out rate, and I think that raises a lot of interesting ideas about how we're sort of going at this backwards. Learn this stuff because you should learn it is not a selling point, whereas learn it because you need it and you have a use for it and you can do it is a huge selling point.
So how do we apply that societally? I mean, how do we take that and make it a cultural shift that we're having people do things that are exciting? We're you know, I'm assuming if you have somebody come out and they look through a telescope for the first time and they see the stars, I know it was much later in my life than I assumed that it would have been, looking back, that I ever looked through a telescope and actually got to see the rings of Saturn, and there was that funky planet with little dots on the side of it. I was like, seriously? I'm looking at Saturn. I'm old enough to know how far away Saturn is on, you know, the scale, and I can see that much detail in the planet with just some glass in a tube. Seriously, that's crazy. And it really sparked an interest, a higher level interest in astronomy, just by being able to have an actual experience, physical experience, going and seeing something like that versus just seeing a picture of Hubble or you know, seeing a picture of the planet from Voyager or something like that. Do you find that people come back once they're there the first time? They want to come back more?
Not for the stargazing programs for some reason, but what I do find is I set up my telescope on my front yard for Halloween. I've been doing that for like, I don't know, it's 20 years now. And parents bring their kids back every year. They make sure to stop at my house because of that reason. It has been unfortunate the last few years because there have not been a lot of great things to look at. Saturn has migrated to, you know, different seasons kind of a thing. But I remember some of the reactions. This one kid was convinced I had some kind of a slide in front of my telescope.
What's the overarching story? I think the fact that Tim put that on the top is really important. And we talk about specific examples, but we don't have a collective story, right? And we can complain about the culture that we're creating, but the reality of our culture is that the only thing that really resonates with all of us collectively is story. So if I talk about the space exploration story or the astronomy story, what is it today? And I think the reason that it doesn't resonate with Noah, my son isn't here, right? It doesn't resonate with him because he doesn't know why it should. He doesn't know what the story is. We have random facts. We have random programs. We have random, I mean, kind of, it seems like they're not connected in any way, benefits that the space program gets me. And I don't see the big picture when it's presented to me that way. You can go, you know, whichever way you want. There's this brilliant movie that talks about the NSERI X Prize. It's called Black Sky. People are crying in that movie.
I cry when I see Spaceship One footage still.
Yeah.
There's a TED talk that Peter D. Mandis does.
The overarching story in that is brilliant. I've never seen somebody that watched that. Whether it be, you know, how old are you, 8, 9, something like that? 9. Right? I've never seen a 9-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 70-year-old who watched that and then go, oh, this is what it's about. So where are those? Where are those stories?
I guess my question is, can you tell a story that's like that at the really meta level, or does it really work only in, you know, there is the manned spaceflight story, there's going to be the X Prize story, there's going to be the Big Bang story, there's going to be ones that are in their niche, but can we really even have a cohesive story at some higher level?
Do we need one? Can't we have all of the ones you mentioned?
Because
lots more?
I feel like, I mean, I sort of sit in the middle of a lot of things, and I don't know I don't see it, because there's so much of it.
I don't think NASA has a plot line for that story. So I don't think there is one. I think there are many stories within what we do, and some of them work with kids. Some of them can engage kids in a very powerful way. But I think in terms of the bigger picture, something overarching, I don't think there is anything. I don't think there can be anything either, because what NASA does is so diverse.
And say I would almost take it the other way and say that we need to back out a little bit, that we get so focused in on what's the science story, what's the human spaceflight story, what's the satellite story, what's the astronomy story. We need to have a separate story for everything, and let's make a character, and it'll be a bear, and then we're going to have it be blue. You know, like, I mean, you can just go really into the weeds on some of this stuff off on a tangent, but for me, what I keep seeing is that all of it comes back to exploration, and that doesn't necessarily mean sending people somewhere. It means the exploration that my 1-year-old has gotten to do, where she learns how to walk. You know, like that type of exploration of your own environment, and then finding out the application of, oh, I need to learn how to use my legs because I'm trying to walk over here. All right, now I have a context for learning. I'm going to work on using my legs. You know, she wants something, she figures out what she needs, she learns how to use that and does it repetitively, ridiculously amounts. And then she'll go and do it. And I think that's, for me, the story that I get is that science is exploration. You have to be able to explore your world. You have to have tools to do that. And if we can foster the exploration instinct in kids, that's what's going to push them forward to doing all these other things. You don't have to get them to where they just think that a star is cool, or that they just think that you know, space is cool, or that I want to be an astronaut because I want to go out and float in space. But if they're interested in exploration and discovering things, period, they'll move into sciences, they'll move into math, and even if they go into the humanities, they have an explorer spirit that will push them into, I want to know why.
So I'm going to be devil's advocate.
Bring it.
I taught middle school. I went through the whole teacher preparation training, standard everything in college, which was basically nothing. And what you are talking about is a fundamental change in the way that science is taught in schools, and something that's going to take not just one, but a few generations to correct, which means that policies are going to have to be changed ultimately, as well as institutions that train teachers, as well as the schools that support and hire the teachers, which means the administrators' attitudes are going to have to change, which means that the unions are going to have to change, which means that the people that decide to become science teachers are going to have to change. So what can we do?
Yeah, imagine how much it sucked when they figured out the world wasn't flat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how's it done
need
now?
to change your science books a little bit.
How's it done now?
Yeah, well, yeah, that was the next thing.
How's it done now? Well, we had one class, I think, on sciences inquiry. And I was really lucky, I think, to be in a cohort with our leader was a high school physics teacher, and he really felt strongly that science should be taught this way. But there is such a fight between how do you combat standardized testing, where the kids need to know facts, and the way that we feel that science should be taught, which is exploratory. So, you know, for middle school, the way I approached my classes was that for that age group in middle and elementary school, the facts that you learn are far superseded by the concepts that solidify in your mind and how ideas are built. And if you go in and you try and teach the facts through memorization and, you know, notes and all that, it doesn't really matter how well they do on a test. They're not going to learn the mindset that's required for scientific literacy. But the way that science is generally taught, because inquiry takes a whole lot of work. And I mean, it takes breaking out of your shell, and you know, teachers haven't been taught that way. College is in lectures. Their high school, it was lectures. Every once in a while you do a lab. People throw things at you and you regurgitate them. I mean, that's the standard way that learning happens for the most part. So, you know, it's only expected that teachers would feel most comfortable delivering information in that way as well. The textbooks do not facilitate exploration. They give canned labs with expected answers. The questions are poorly written. Even the text doesn't give room for exploration. You know, there's a problem and there's an answer. Well, in science, there isn't an answer, really. I mean, there's a good answer and there's a bad answer, but there rarely is ever a right answer. And you know, so that's the way that it's being done in the schools. I feel it's that way because it's always been that way.
So that's not true, because that wasn't true when I was in middle school, and I graduated high school in 1979.
Can I,
so it's not that far off.
Can I quote something here? This went a bit viral on the web. It was this girl's valedictorian speech that loads of people started quoting.
This was this year, right?
This was a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. I'm graduating. I should look at this as a positive experience, especially being at the top of my class. However, in retrospect, I cannot say that I am more intelligent than any of my peers. I can attest that I am only the best at doing what I'm told and working the system. Yet here I stand, and I'm supposed to be proud that I've completed this period of indoctrination. I'll leave in the fall to go on to the next phase expected of me in order to receive a paper document that certifies I'm capable of work. But I can attest that I'm a human being, a thinker and an adventurer, not a worker. I have no clue what I want to do with my life. I have no interest because I saw every subject of study as work, and I excelled at every subject just for the purpose of excelling, not learning, and quite frankly, now I'm scared. This is a girl just giving her valedictorian speech.
She has guts.
It is amazing.
But I think that sums up a lot of what's going on. And I just want to point out that what you said actually made a lot of sense. The exploration process takes time.
Yeah.
You know, and giving people a fact is very easy. You know, this is blue is really easy. But when you say which color is this, then there's thought, there's trial and error.
Where do the words come from?
You know,
is this something that's come about after standardized testing? Is that what's ruined everything? I mean, because you said that it wasn't like that when you were in school, and it is now. So, what did you have standardized testing like what we have now?
We didn't even have that when I was in that age.
Yeah.
I didn't have
not as much.
And I remember in middle school taking a class in science, which was they were doing electricity and magnetism, and they had us do well, what would happen if, and hook things up and crank the generators and actually try things and hold hands and feel the electricity and do that kind of stuff. Those aren't things that you can that you're going to get a true-false answer on an exam. So that's kind of the thing I'm remembering doing.
Yours is more qualitative versus quantitative.
Yeah.
We're looking for how does it feel, not is this yes or no.
It was very experiential, and obviously, that was what, early 1970s, So I remember that from 40 years ago.
Well, not every teacher stands up and lectures. It's still very. It takes more work, and that's not the majority.
I know I came in late, but is there a reason that we are focused on the traditional school/teaching system?
So what brought us to this point was that
no,
we were
I'm
going
just
through
curious.
this.
I don't want to say, well, screw you and all of that. And my kids, but my point just being that we all learn every single day from all the people and the experiences that we have and we come in contact with outside it. Yes, in school, but outside of school as well. And that if, much like this girl, obviously she understands the concept that, yeah, she can be a parent, she's a really good parent, and that's awesome, but that there are other inputs that she needs, requires, and desires to better expand her learning and her capabilities.
And so we did kind of go off in the weeds about standardized testing and stuff, but what this came from was this is just stuff I was writing down where people who do outreach, just things that they do and say, and what we were talking about is as a culture, the culture is that science is hard, science is not fun, science is, like you're a geek, you like weird things, it's not easy. So where does that come from? It's the school system, well what's driving that? And so that's how we came to is the death of our culture because of standardized testing.
I just said this is a really huge problem, and then what can we do? Because I would rather leave here with some solid ideas, knowing that it's a really daunting task, and have a plan, like an action plan. So what can we do when all of that is facing us?
And I was going to say, I'd be glad actually to do a session either today or tomorrow where we talk about the informal and the outreach side of things, the outside of school time, because that's what we do Sarah and I do at Goddard, and that's the only way we've come up with really to combat that stuff is when there's such a huge systemic thing going on. It's not that we give up as much as that we just look for every form of attack we can get.
The next session happens to be open in this room if you
Okay.
want to continue
Yeah,
that
we could
or
do
go off
that.
on that particular tangent. Technically, this session is up, just so you know.
Oh.
But we can, nobody else is moving in.
It's my hired session monitor right over there.
Oh, nice.
I pick up on the point you just made. Before I was hired at JPL, during my interview, in fact, they said, what do you think of the stuff we've done so far? And I was talking, I spoke about Cassie, which is a thing that kind of predates the stuff I demoed this morning, which is just Cassini and Sapling going around doing its thing. And I said, it's a shame there isn't any kind of educational content to go with this. It would be fantastic to have kids using this thing to figure something out for themselves, like how close does it get to this? How quickly does it go here? Why does it do this? How much does this change? And if we had some sort of little kind of exercises that could go into a classroom, and I met resistance from those suggestions because they don't tick particular syllabus boxes.
Mm.
And they're penalized for thinking outside of the box, for wanting to want to explore and not just give back the facts. I have more issues with his teacher saying, oh, he's not focused. He only thinks about science. He doesn't care about all of his other subjects. And he's penalized for thinking beyond what the standard answer is.
That's the absolute opposite of the way we should be rewarded. Right?
Exactly.
We should be rewarded, not kind of fun.
Biggest problem that I have.
Well,
And he goes to private school. It's not even like, it's like PG County Public School issue. He goes to private school. And a lot of it is that even with dealing with him myself, I have to run to the internet. Is this a factor? Is this something he's making up? Is this a factor? Is this something that he's making up? Because I don't know enough about it. And I know he confuses the teacher because she's used to teaching multiplication tables and these kinds of things. When he starts ranting on about, what, Noah?
Anything science related.
I mean, she's used to just like, you can have cardboard
Right.
kids sitting in classroom and she teaches to them and then makes them take a test and teaches to them and makes them take a test. And she, if they were all good valedictorians, they would just be automatons and throw that back. So how do we change? And I think this is part of it is we can go about it and kind of attack from the outside and be, guerrilla warfare on the education system. And I think we have to do that anyways. And even with a perfect education system, I wouldn't want to cut out any of the EPO stuff that's been going on, and I wouldn't want to deny people the chance to delve deeper into something that they love. But how do we get this more into society? How do we, because I think if we don't focus on the schools and we keep having less excited kids coming out of schools and less opportunity for them to really be engaged, it's not going to matter how much we do on the outside. Their core learning environment is going to choke the life out of them long before that comes up. So how do we get this stuff? How do we get them to be excited and effective? How do we, and I know there's an electronics versus an in real life personal experience that you can go and do that makes a difference to where they're empowered to go out and participate in something. Is it just that we need more icebreaker activities? Is it that we need more time in the classroom? Is it that, is there one thing that's just really screwing everything else up? And it's cascading, or are there multiple things we really have to end up focusing on? Yes, Mike Grunwald.
I'm going to think outside the box, so don't penalize me. I was just thinking that it would be really cool. At some point, the Discovery Network made crab fishing freaking awesome. Right? I mean, these guys just pick crabs out of a pot. And it's about story. It's about the human element of it. It's about their struggles. I mean, these are not the brightest guys in the world, but the show is really compelling. I mean, really compelling, right? I was really upset when Phil died. Okay?
Yeah.
I was.
Oh, yeah.
He's a crab fisherman. I eat the stuff that he catches. Right? The crabs are awesome. But that's about that. It's about that story. Can you imagine if half of the effort went into that of telling this next space shuttle launches story? What if the producers of Deadliest Catch did that? What would they say? What would they do? What part of the human element would we resonate with, right? That's the kind of thing that would get everyone involved. What do their wives think? What are they worried about?
Well, what I hear is that that's the Time magazine articles that they used to have, where Buzz Aldrin's on the cover in his Corvette with some hot chick that's not his wife. And oh no, that's a reporter I'm talking to. You know, but
Yeah.
you know, like it's exciting, it's interesting, but is that what we need? Do we need
crab
tabloids?
fishing, right? I mean, and we're talking about crab fishing versus going into freaking space.
So why?
Which is also a more dangerous job.
So,
The Deadliest
Deadliest
Catch's
Catch, there you
entire
go.
thing is saying this is the most dangerous job in the world, but it's not. So,
Well,
but,
it's
well,
on world.
Well, on world. But it's like the most dangerous job you can have. And the thing is, that it seems like that angle has been really effective. And what's funny is it's like we have a fear of making being an astronaut seem dangerous. Like it seems like there's actually a fear of letting
Who
that
decided that
information
safety
be
first
known.
was a good idea? There's nothing safe about going into space.
Discovery
right? So it's not-
knows about space. When we left Earth, that series of it was actually really quite good.
It was.
So they know about space. So when they decided to make another fly-on-the-wall documentary series, why the hell did they go to fishermen?
Because they don't have access to space. I mean, like that's my.
Right.
I bet you, PAO, if Discovery said we want to do a series about some astronauts, would they say no?
Not to the kind of access that they
It
were given
depends.
on when they went to Phil Harris and said, we want to film everything 24 hours a day, and you don't get to decide what goes in and goes out. The only time that they ever decided is they asked when Phil died, they asked the sons if it was okay if they aired it. It was the only time. But other than that, anything goes. You're not going to get that kind of access at the vehicle assembly building in Florida.
And you have to watch this. I've been behind the scenes on some reality shows, and they do really run from, we're going to just have the cameras on you, and we're going to put what's there on, and I've seen them where they redo a take 3 and 4 times of reaction.
Right.
You know, hey, guess what? Ah! Okay, wait, now we got to do it from over here. Hey, guess what? Ah! And like, you know, there's 2 ways to do reality television documentary style shows. I'm not saying that, you know, Greatest Catch and Biggest Loser or you know, Survivor or something like that it can't be done, but I think there's, to be fair, NASA PAO is probably afraid that it's going to end up being more like the Real Housewives or, you know, Jersey Shore or something like that, where they end up being more character than they are themselves.
But a brief example, it's a series of 4 vids that the Mars Outreach JPL did earlier in this year about parachute testing for the next Mars rover. And these 4 videos were at the 150-foot wind tunnel, trying to throw this parachute out. The last of the 4 is entirely about an April Fool's joke that one of the engineers did on that project manager by getting the entire experiment team to collude to make him think that they got no data for the final qualifying test for hours and hours and hours. Okay? That whole video is just about personality, nothing to do with Mars or parachutes. The second one was that the boom lift they needed to go and bolt the parachute onto the thing got a flat tire. And it was about the people and how to figure out, oh, we can get one off this truck. It was all about personality. And they've been quite popular, but I think people are nervous about doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I haven't seen that promoted anywhere. I haven't seen any of them.
They're quite fun.
I think what NASA does a lot of times is they think that the hardware is the story, and it's never the hardware, it's the people. And they don't do a good job of, like you said, that you were really upset when that guy died, because you felt like you knew him. And
I was upset when Kristen McCall died. That's the last time I can remember a story like that.
But I mean, most of the time, you don't know the people. And I think it's more than just the astronauts. People get really excited about getting to know the people that work on the programs, and there's like no access to them.
Right.
I mean, I started writing down some like shuttle stories that you know the ones I'm talking about on the Space Tweeps blog from my coworker who's been out at Kennedy Space Center for 38 years, and just telling me these little funny stories, and some of them have very little to do with the hardware. But people love them. I mean, somebody translated them into Polish, and like 400 people read it, and then were asking for more of them. So it's totally not the hardware in those cases.
Well, Noah, what do you like better? I mean, like, do you like just looking at the facts and figures? Do you like watch what other than science, or what type of science stuff do you watch right now? What type of media do you consume? What type of things do you like best? Like, if you could say, what's your favorite science-y type TV show? What would it be?
It would be more like Science Channel.
Do you watch the Science Channel? Like, what kind of shows do you watch on the Science Channel?
All of them.
All of them? You just turn
yeah,
on the
he'll
TV?
turn on the Science Channel. He'll watch the Science Channel. His interest is He wanted to be an astronaut. His GPA fell, and I was like, "How are you going to be an astronaut with grades like this?" He's like, "I'll just be a scientist." Very interested.
I want it on a T-shirt.
Let me tell you a story. I know astronauts that were high school not so awesomes.
That doesn't mean.
But he
it's
doesn't
okay.
care about the not so awesome.
Just saying for the long term.
I'm going to give a shout out to a guy named Tom Jackson. He teaches people how to perform on stage as musicians and how to communicate with an audience. And his real big thing is that you have to, in your show, as you design your show, it almost doesn't matter what kind of music you do or what kind of an audience that you're talking to, you have to create moments in the show that people connect with. It's all about the people and the connecting. People don't really sit down. If I'm up on stage performing and I'm playing music and nobody has any idea who I am, and they've never heard my music, how do I get that audience to connect with me? And the answer is, the audience isn't actually listening to my music. The audience is actually looking at me and going, do I like him? And I have to be willing for two things to happen. One, I have to be willing for them to say, no, I don't really like him. I have to be willing to do that as a performer on stage, otherwise I'm never going to get up there. The second thing is, I have to create a moment where they connect with me as a person, because they aren't listening to my music until at least the third song. And if I don't connect with them with a person, as a people to people, the music they won't even listen to it. They'll never even hear it. They'll sit in a coffee house and they'll drink their coffee and they'll talk to their friend who they came with, right? So it's the same kind of thing, though. If we talk to the people and we give them access to the people and we tell the stories, people connect to people. People sympathize with people. People don't sympathize with hardware. You know, you're never going to create a moment. Okay, there's those of us who will, but you're going to have a much more human connection and kind of a visceral reaction to people versus hardware. You know, there's a lot of hardware on Deadliest Catch. You got the ships, you got the rigs, you got the the winches, and you got all the king. But what you're focused on is the guy, because they're not. They're showing you the hardware, but they're talking to the people, and the people are the ones that you really connect with. So that's a good lesson.
All right, we're going to stop for just 1 second. Carrie.
You go.
Oh, I just do my own little personal yay space. I'm a writer, but not for it to the public. It's more for the engineering community. But the public does have access to it. So anyhow, you guys, that was not very descriptive at all.
It was not.
Sorry.
Who do you write for?
A division within the Office of the Chief Engineer. It's called the Academy of Program Project and Engineering Leadership. So it's the other Apple. Yeah. So mostly we tell stories about projects as they're being built, missions as they're being built. So how do we get, what went wrong with Hubble? What happened with Kobe? How do we get that off the ground after the shuttle, after Challenger? So I think I mentioned in one of the talks earlier that missions need to have stories behind them to make them more interesting. So I'm part of that, but a lot of the writing that I end up doing ends up being technical. So anyhow, we'll keep going around.
I'm going to write down just things that I hear. No, it's not.
Totally crashed.
Well, you're obviously the people that you're a representative of the group that we're trying to reach. So you're the next generation of explorers. So we'll come back to you. Unless do you do outreach? Do you do stuff where you teach science to the kids?
He tries to. No one wants to listen. And that's the hardest problem that he's coming into, is that no one shares the same passion that he does. So I work at Northrop Grumman Corporation. I'm actually in business management and finance, so I have no idea about any of this, so I depend a lot on Emory and whatever he posts outside his door. And that's where I get all of my outreach to bring home to him, because I don't share that same passion. So I have to find it wherever I can to help him.
Gotcha. Ladies in the back, do you do education and outreach work? Somebody fell asleep. Actually, sitting.
Your topic is keeping them interested.
Right here, and they're like, "Yep, I'm awake. I'm asleep." To a certain degree, that's going to happen no matter what. I just realized.
I would think statistically a certain percentage,
are just going to be asleep the whole time anyways. And I think that's okay. The goal, though, would be to have more awake than asleep. And the ones that are awake actually paying attention. So how do we do that? And this doesn't work for me. We have to like circle chairs or do something crazy because I can't stand around like people in the back of the room not participating.
And he fell asleep in a circle.
Right. I will fall asleep in this thing if we're not.
I'm thinking of a technical informing. I understand.
He's the one that get all of the sides. Unless you have a fusion reactor.
Trust me, I'm capable of being in my social
We should just sit together as a pocket of badness. Actually, let me take that one and then we'll pull two out from that room.
Okay, you know what's the left-hand one?
No.
I saw it is. You're playing earlier.
Martha's going to replace Emily as my new best staff, you don't understand.
Are we gonna go out to lunch?
I mean, you see a sunspot right now.
Be happy.
Well, let's go check.
I don't even know what to think about this microphone here.
See what the sun looks like.
I'll hide behind the microphone.
I got to be in the SDO mock yesterday, Mission Operations Center yesterday. Absolutely awesome.
I'm sure someone will come in and tell us whether the computer can see things. And who cares?
You can see the backs of people's heads.
Exactly. You know what? If people were really engaged, they would be here. I'm not there.
But you are here.
I am
I think
here.
you're the
See,
only one
that's
blocking
the
him.
biggest thing. And you guys are here, which is exciting. Wow. So, engaging the next generation of explorers. I think we have some cool people here. Does everybody know who is actually actively involved in education outreach programs right now? All right. Go around and say what kind of education outreach stuff you do already, just so we kind of have an idea of where we're at.
Can we start on that side of the room?
Yeah.
Sure, okay. So I work in the Office of Communication Education at JPL, and that's where our visualization group lives. And it is our group is about trying to make the very best interactive 3D visualizations we can of missions, of data, whatever it takes to explain what we're doing. I only moved out here about 14 weeks ago. When I was back in the UK, I was not in the space industry, but doing a lot of lectures at astronomy societies and schools. I'm going to try and start doing that over here, but it's taken a while.